Uh, Dr. Thomson's research was among the first to advance geospatial methodologies for locating heirs property at scale. Drawing on geospatial analysis, mixed methods research, and applied social science, Thomson documents the human cost of clouded title and translates those findings into policy relevant tools for communities and practitioners. So please join us as we introduce Dr. Thomson formally, and Chris Garland, my colleague, will do that now. And we will let you know that this is being recorded as you see, and we're also going to provide Dr. Thomson's presentation on our website. So thanks again, everyone, for being here. Chris Garland, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Raquel. And yes, so thrilled to have our featured presenter, Dr. Ryan Thomson, joining us for today's CIB call. First, I'm going to start by sharing a bit more about Dr. Thomson. Dr. Ryan Thomson, Associate Professor of Rural Sociology at the College of Agriculture, Auburn University. His research, teaching, and organizing center focuses on heirs property, inheritance disputes, clouded titles, involuntary land loss, deferred maintenance, and community deterioration across the Deep South. Dr. Thomson has spent the past decade working directly alongside communities facing heirs property loss. He wrote his dissertation at the University of Florida while working with the Afro-Indigenous Gullah-Geechee Nation and Low Country, documenting families facing displacement from predation. In partnership with Tuskegee and Alabama A&M, he co-founded the Alabama Heirs Property Alliance to provide statewide resource and technical assistance. Dr. Thomson served as inaugural chair of the USDA SARA 49 multi-state project on heirs property and has trained more than 600 organizers across more than a dozen states through the Southern Rural Development Center. His work has been cited in case law and covered by NBC News, ABC News, and USA Today. Last year, I personally became familiar with Dr. Thomson's work when, in coordination with Neighborhood Housing Services of Birmingham, he authored Holding On to Home, heirs property in Birmingham, Alabama, produced as part of the inaugural NCST heirs property partnership cohort, and provided analytic support for a middle neighborhoods hypothesis. During today's presentation, we'll learn more about what heirs property research reveals about the scale and value of a major form of land tenure insecurity, the consequences of clouded title and intergenerational wealth, and how systemic barriers to land access and economic mobility impact communities. So with that, Dr. Thomson, Ryan, thanks so much for being here. I think we're ready to turn it over to you.
Why, thank you for that fantastic introduction. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm a big fan of NCST and all the different organizations. I saw quite a few names in the chat of attendees today that I'm very interested in hearing more from. But yeah, let me go ahead and deep dive into my career obsession. For the last 10 years, this has become the fixation. I am a sociologist, particularly in rural areas. And I use this cover slide here for our presentation today because this is the house that is next door to mine. It was heirs property at the time of taking this photo. It was lost for $40,000 and is today valued around $600,000. So we're talking about a huge switch and loss of intergenerational wealth there in that process. Now, to quote Thomas Mitchell, MacArthur Genius Grant winner, that heirs property is the biggest problem most people have never heard of. Let's see if we can. And so getting to talk and learn from NCST over the years, I kind of wear a bunch of hats. I kind of run a hat shop in terms of whatever lets me do the work the most efficiently. Auburn University is definitely my home. Love working in the College of Agriculture. But I also get to work with regional organizations like the Southern Rural Development Center that has been putting on heirs property trainings for the last 4 years. We have a highly detailed curriculum. Also have an ethics toolkit that goes alongside our work. And then a few years ago, a colleague and I formed Clear Landing. It's a nonprofit to provide direct legal services. Since we can't do that through universities, we needed to create a nonprofit for this. And we have currently cleared about $4 million in property. And then lastly, but perhaps most importantly, this whole project that I'm going to really deep dive in today was done in coordination and collaboration with Neighborhood Housing Services of Birmingham, Director Carol Clark, Evan Holloway, who was a NCST inaugural member, we got to really get into Birmingham, and there was a lot of really interesting discoveries in the way, and I'll be flagging those as we go. And so just a general roadmap of where we're going. Definitions, terminology, what are we talking about? The research over the last 50 years, quantifying heirs property, it seems like that's what everyone wants to do. But also looking at some of its burdens, and then dial in on Birmingham, looking at the middle neighborhood hypothesis and some suggestions if you're working on an heirs property project. And so let me begin by defining heirs property, the centerpiece of everything we're doing today. It is real property, meaning not intellectual property. It is a physical thing. In the case of heirs property, it's normally land or housing that is passed between family members by inheritance, usually without a will or without an estate plan in place. It is a highly vulnerable form of property. It can lead to involuntary loss. It can lead to deterioration. It is a problem as we understand it today. But I also want to back up and say that heirs property was, for most of the United States, a very common convention that we expected people to pass land this way. We treat it like it's a bizarre thing on why would you not have a will? But only a third of the United States currently has a will, and we're even in a better situation that doesn't have legal deserts anymore. We still have legal deserts, but not to the degree we had them, say, 50 years ago. And so I bring up W.E.B. Du Bois here because he was one of the first who I think really started this. He's also a rural sociologist, but he was going around looking at who inherited the land as it passed on through generations. Now, when someone passes intestate means that there was no will. And oftentimes we hear this called clouded title. Some parts up north call it tangled title. I just got back from Arizona and they call it fractionated land. There's a lot of different names for this. There is no one size fits all. But if there had to be one, it is currently heirs property. That is because Thomas Mitchell and his team wrote the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act. If you're more interested in learning about all of this, I recommend looking into Dr. Mitchell and Erica Powers' book on the matter. But to get back to the problem, it is land that is often targeted for two types of sales, partition or tax sale. And oftentimes this involves judges' discretion of best use. Is the property being put to highest and best use? Is it yielding as much commercial benefit? Is it increasing the tax base in the way that most judges want to see their tax base increase? However, this loophole under the Wigfall versus Mobley ruling, the United States has an operating system developed in the 1600s. We haven't really changed from that. We have been slowly implementing small patches, but we don't have a new operating system. Since we're running on this common law from back then, this loophole has led to mass loss of personal property, homes, and land, particularly in the Deep South. And so when we talk about heirs property, we say it's clouded rather than clear. Most people, when you buy a brand new house, your title is clear under an owner. But when someone passed away 8 generations ago, the property does not get divided up based on the fractionation of the tree. It just stays as a single unit with sub-fractionated interests that have not been calculated. And so to summarize this in a metaphor, it's like sending the family tree into a wood chipper in the sense that all the single pieces of ownership get fractionated, but the ownership remains under a single shared cloud. And so there's been a lot of research on this in the last 50 years. The first one that really kicked the door open was the Emergency Land Fund. The Federation of Southern Cooperatives Land Assistance Fund today produced the first study about 50 years ago. They started researching it 50 years ago. It was published 49 years ago. And since then, we've seen a lot of different work. I mean, everyone from Georgia Appleseed doing some of the first real breakthroughs in the sociological literature. We see studies from Cassandra Gaither Johnson at the U.S. Forest Service. We see Connor Bailey, my colleague, and his students working on ownership characteristics and patterns. But it wasn't until this middle piece came out here, Pippin, Jones, and Gaither Johnson from the U.S. Forest Service, that the door really got kicked open here. It was published in 2017, and it was the first to really point out that we can use mortgage databases to locate heirs property. But since the United States does not have a standardized tax nomenclature system, two appraisers can see the same property and classify it two different ways. As a result, there is no single heirs property definition, which makes it oftentimes hard to find. And so from this, we've seen a lot of great work come out over the years. We see the legal scholars highlighted here in brown. We also see kind of a middle emerging area from anthropologists, place-based attachments. Why do people choose to stay? How do they choose to stretch their dollar? What is deferred maintenance in the situation of a shared governing structure? But you also see economists coming in trying to figure out how people maximize their rationality. I always laugh about this because I don't think families are rational. But if we look at the citations, we do start to see some real emerging patterns. And for the last 50 years, much of the research has been concentrated on rural areas because its effects are so directly seen. We also see a lot of the economic and legal branches starting to break out. We even see places like the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank, JP Morgan, and others coming into this space, starting to look at the long-term financial impacts of this. And so when we look at this in terms of keywords, we see it linking everything from impacts and agriculture up to who gets to participate in decisions of property, who gets to manage the land, who gets to live on the land, what are the best management practices, and how do they define who gets access to what exactly. My colleague JC Fisher and I are currently working on a property that is likely never going to be cleared, but it has over 500 co-heirs. It's over 100 acres, and many of the people live on it like an informal neighborhood. But there is an underlying governing structure, even if it's not been codified. And so law is definitely one of the big parts of this. I'm not very good at analyzing the law literature because I don't speak Latin, but I'm slowly learning. And this law literature definitely has a different pattern to it, the way they write, the way they speak about it. But what they're really trying to talk about is how property and probate works a house, a piece of land, through a system that is trying to, again, put it to best use, but also, in many instances, try and keep the families in place. And so I want to go ahead and shout out that I think there are two huge emerging themes in the Heirs property research over the last few years. The first is investigative journalism. There has been absolutely remarkable public-facing pieces that have come out from The City, Brownstoner, Garden and Gun, the Atlanta Voice, even up here in the top right, the Miami Herald. We're seeing these journalists essentially embed with the family and learn about the injustice that oftentimes comes with this vulnerable form of ownership. At the same time, the arrival of nonprofit research has changed the field so rapidly in a remarkably short period of time. In the last 2 years, whether it be NCST, Urban Institute, Lincoln Institute, NeighborWorks, groups like Neighborhood Housing Services Birmingham have started to put out work that is different than academic work in many ways, but really gets to the issue. And this nonprofit arrival has brought with it a much greater emphasis on urban. Whether you're thinking of, say, Detroit Future Cities, which is one of the recent great city studies published, Jacksonville, LISC Jacksonville with their brief, and then of course Pew Trust with their study of Philadelphia, which is one of the earlier ones. We see this emphasis transitioning a little bit away from rural. Georgia Appleseed has even started to engage in this, where we're looking at many of these patterns that we've been picking up in rural also map onto neighborhoods. And so just looking at an example here, say grandpa and grandma had 100 acres, no will. It then goes to their 4 children. All 4 of their children then pass because this property has been trapped for, say, 3-4 generations. Grandchild 1 gets a 1/8 interest. Grandchild 2 also gets a 1/8 interest, but they pass away, so it goes to their heirs. Now the great-grandchildren have a 1/32 interest. But then one of the great-grandchildren dies. Now you have great-great-grandchildren with a 1/64 interest and a grandchild with a 1/8 interest, both having equal claim to the property, even though grandchild 1's been paying the taxes for 40 years. This is how families get into a huge source of conflict. And it's natural for younger people and older people to want different things. I find oftentimes the younger generation doesn't have the place-based attachment to know what the value of a place, a home, a piece of land is. and oftentimes want to liquidate. And so you get this generational tension within heirs property. And so a few years ago, I was interviewed by NBC looking at heirs property, and the opening line that I've pretty much stuck to ever since then is, let's call it what it is, legal land theft. In many states, it is not very difficult to steal heirs property. With the research we've done here in Birmingham, if we got $1 million fund, we could probably have stolen, I'd guess, at least 60 properties in less than a year. Thankfully, there are people on the ground who know how to stop these things now. But in many cities, there are new mechanisms emerging to steal houses, property, even deed theft is just starting to become more and more common. And so let me walk you through how this happens. As the family tree gets fragmented, like on the previous slides, one generation moves away to California, sets their family up there. Another one moves up to Maine, another moves to New York. An heir hunter, someone who wants to acquire that property and knows it's heirs property, starts mapping the family tree and finding people who are so far removed that have never been back to the property here in Alabama. And they say, you have a $500 interest in a property back in Alabama, somewhere you've never been. I'll buy it from you for $5,000, 10 times what it's worth. They think it's a free payday. As a result, this real estate speculator then acquires a few different ends of the branches, goes to the court and says, Judge, I can't agree with this family that I'm technically a member of. I want it to liquidate. The court would then force it to a courthouse fire sale, oftentimes on the steps, for pennies on the dollar. I've seen properties here in Alabama where an acre was bought for under $100. I mean, I've seen properties stolen for 6 to 7 cents per dollar of what it's actually worth. And in doing so, not only does it strip the family of the property, but it strips them of the intergenerational wealth that could have been. And so we reached a breaking point here in Alabama 2 years ago. I guess it's 3 years ago now, when a woman had just buried her husband and came home. They built the house. She had lived in it for 60 years and was then notified that she was going to be evicted within 1 week. And she decided to try and fight off the developer who was trying to do this. Corinne thankfully won her lawsuit, took it all the way to the Alabama Supreme Court and won. If you can win a Supreme Court fight in Alabama, you can win anywhere. Wherever you're watching this from, you can win. It just oftentimes feels like an inevitable loss when you have such a fragmented family. I'm very proud that Corinne held on, but this kind of set a precedent that we're not going to allow this kind of land theft to go on anymore in Alabama. And so the impact on a single household is that it does perpetuate poverty. You don't inherit anything but a tax bill. You can't loan against it. You can't get a mortgage. You can't put it down as collateral to send your grandbabies to college. And as a result, the life opportunities of the successive generations are thereby limited. Second, it just creates a lot of emotional stress, and that's ripe for conflict. People naturally argue with each other because they have different wants for the land. Some just want to be done with it and move on. Others want to preserve what great grandmother bought or sold. Now, another big one that I'm getting more into is the struggle to insure a property that does not have a single name on the deed. Many cities require homeowners insurance for different types of arrangements, but you can't get anyone to agree to insure your home if you don't have that clear title. And then lastly, blocking access to some federal programs. In my experience, most federal programs are blocked. Basic things like weatherization, even basic things through the USDA like EQIP or CRP. Sorry, y'all, I'm in the College of Agriculture, but I can't even get you a hoop house, let alone get your farm up and running if you don't have a clear title. And so this then scales up. It's not just what's happening in the house and the conflict within the family, but it then has a community-wide impact. Land and houses start to go blighted or left behind. And the way that they're managed when it's owned by 6 owners, no one wants to fix the whole roof because it's not going to be theirs to claim. You're fixing it, but it's in the family's name. It can't really be developed to full potential. This is how the judges see it. This land is not being put to full use. A developer could put a whole apartment complex on this. And then it gets to the real issue as I see it here in Alabama. We are either the poorest state or the second poorest state, depending on what year it is. The loss of the community tax base is huge. We see schools closing. We see kids getting bussed across county lines because we couldn't even keep the school open, let alone the library that they needed. And this leads to loss of opportunity and investments. If your community can't sustain the schools or the roads, chances are no one's going to want to put a park in if you can't even get there because the roads are so bad. It's just a domino effect of different things that lead to the poverty we oftentimes see in Alabama. And so it not only deteriorates your housing stock, but it decreases your property values. It traps your intergenerational wealth. You can't pull against it. You can't do anything. It perpetuates poverty. Economists call this dead capital because you have no access to loans or liquidity. I agree that it is a great metaphor. DeSoto had a great point when he said it. But careful, y'all. If you're talking to a family, never call a house dead. Like, don't use dead capital when working with people on the front lines. I prefer legal limbo or something like that, but the academic term is dead capital. And then lastly, it is very difficult to locate, as I've already mentioned, because there's no standardized tax nomenclature in the United States. And so if you're starting a project working on heirs property, you're going to have to learn to work with secondary data. You're not going to door knock. You're not going to primary data collect everything. And what this means is, one, begin by removing the non-starters. Get the corporations, the churches, the government buildings, the trusts, remove them all. Learn your local tax system. Here in Birmingham, we have citizen access, county records, Regrid. If anyone's interested in starting a project, I highly recommend you look at Regrid, and I'm happy to talk through some of that. They have a great program for folks on the ground trying to improve their community. And then lastly, CoreLogic. I'm very big on CoreLogic for a lot of reasons. The problem is it costs $50,000 to buy their national data set. And you look for certain features, ownership classifications. I'm not going to geek out too hard on all this part of it right now. But when COVID hit, I sat down and developed 200 lines of code to find heirs property as effectively as I can. It was an attempt to find a one size fits all, but it turns out that there's so much variation that doing a grounded approach in your community can be highly effective without a $50,000 data set. And so this is the map I am most well known for. This is a 2023 article with my colleague, Connor Bailey. This is just raw totals. And what you see is the black belt comes up, stretching from the edge of North Carolina and Virginia down across the Carolinas, across lower Georgia, across Alabama, up into the Mississippi Delta, and then it cuts down over Louisiana into Texas. This is where historically Black population is above 30%. This is also an area that struggles with poverty issues. We see heirs property concentrations everywhere, though. It's not just the Black Belt. It's not just this one pocket. It's in cities. It's in Appalachia, as Cassandra Gaither refers to West Virginia and Kentucky, the white ghettos of Appalachia. It is as dense there as it is anywhere in the Black Belt. And so this is acres. I like acres as a way to measure heirs property because, again, I like rural. But the minute I flip it to parcels, suddenly the parcels concentrate where cities are. The more people there are, the smaller the parcels, the more there is to be found. And then lastly, I'll flip it one more time to market value. Now, man, the coastlines are coming up big and cities are coming up pretty big. But if I go back to, you'll notice that acres is not where the market value is. With the exception of Baldwin County down there in Alabama and the greater Myrtle Beach area in South Carolina, market value, parcels, all these things are concentrated in select areas. So how you choose to measure it is up to you. Since it sounds like a lot of the people on the call are urban oriented, I would be focused on parcels and market value. Now, careful before you rush into doing any type of study like this. This is from Pippin et al. They put out dot maps of every single heirs property in these 9 counties. We don't do dot maps anymore. We don't share dot maps anymore because the families who are potentially going to be targeted as a result of that map did not consent to having their public information out there like that. It's how do you study a vulnerable population without making them more vulnerable? If you're doing a heirs property project, it is something to really take a moment and think through. My colleagues and I at SRDC just last month released the Heirs Property Ethics Toolkit. It is available publicly online. I'm happy to share the link. You can Google it. It is a document for outreach, nonprofit, lawyers. We need to get better at the ethics side of this. And so now I arrived to Birmingham, Alabama, the focus of the call today. And Evan, please feel free to chime in. I'm a big fan of what you all have managed to do. When we began the project, our goal was to try and figure out the underlying probate patterns through secondary data and digital approaches. We used Citizen Access Portal, the county records, and we did pick up on some very good patterns. However, nothing was as impactful as going and meeting with the tax assessor's office, because the tax assessor says there's so much in Birmingham, no one's ever sat down and actually tallied it up and quantified it. But the predators are here. There's so many air hunters trying to steal land. We invented our own nomenclature that only exists here to hide heirs property from predators. I would have never been able to find this category that had hundreds and hundreds of properties within it had I not talked to him. Meeting with people on the ground to try and tell them what you're doing and build from the ground up is worth its weight in gold. You will get more out of that in learning the probate patterns than studying every single sub-classification schema that could possibly come up. And so we began by dividing them into 7 categories. And what I think set our project aside, or distinct from many others rather, is that we were meeting with an attorney, J.C. Fisher, and she said, well, do what the lawyers do if you really want to be accurate. And so we were looking at heirs of, estate of, joint tenants, agents of. And I was like, well, what do you do that's so special to verify these things? I can't go call these families. I'm going to scare them off. And she goes, pull the obituaries. And since the Birmingham Times runs through AL.com, almost all of our obituaries were at one source. And anytime we hit a question, oh, is this joint tenants one? Is this person still alive? They haven't sold or improved the property in 80 years. We could pull it up right then and there. And pulling obituaries was actually a great way to ground truth. I do apologize to Sonia and Evan for doing the heavy lifting, because this got very depressing searching through thousands of obituaries. But this actually was a very effective strategy for mapping and ground truthing while we went. And as we did, we started to notice a few patterns, the way people talked about loved ones. It was definitely a beautiful thing. At the same time, within these obituaries, there was this human element that it tells you who all the surviving children are. It tells you who's more likely to come back to that property or maintain it. There's actually a lot of data in the obituaries that I had never thought of before. And so this is the map of Birmingham. It doesn't look like one. I know it looks like a honeycomb, but I can't show you a dot map because I don't do that anymore. So we created hex bins. You do not know the address of any of these houses, but it is largely concentrated in certain parts of the city. It does have a pattern whereby one heirs property tends to be located near other heirs properties, and it has a contagion effect, if you will. And so if you look at, this is just playing with raw data here from the study, the timing of the last legal transfer for heirs property was around 1995, where clear title properties was 2009. This discrepancy, you see even some going back to the 70s. This is a common pattern. You don't clear the title, there's no transactions. It just tends to accumulate with time that it's family land and we're going to keep it that way. But this missing transfer rate in Birmingham, we found that roughly on average, a property will transact about between 8 to 12 years. So seeing something going back to 95 was actually pretty eye-opening. Second, and this is playing with improvement, meaning that there was a significant sizable improvement to the land or to the property, to the house. The dots represent when the improvements happened. The red dots are heirs property. The gray dots are clear title properties. And then we created a line here to indicate the average of those dots. And what we do generally find is that most people in Birmingham are maintaining the properties relatively close to the same way clear title properties are. The big difference is the upgrades that they are making are significantly smaller than the larger upgrades that others are making who have access to mortgages and liquidity. There is even a short window in that 70s timeframe there where heirs property is maintained more often than clear title properties. This goes against the blight narrative. This goes against what we'd expect. Again, these are smaller improvements. They are things like you're not replacing the whole HVAC. You're just trying to get by and maybe redo part of the decking. Oh, we put in some joists. It's oftentimes smaller size improvements, but nevertheless, this challenges the idea that heirs property is an abandoned blighted property that nobody maintains. It is statistically significant and it even surpasses clear title properties in many situations. And so while we're doing this whole study, I got to know NCST better, and it was a learning curve for me. I am an academic, but there's always new things to learn. And since I'm rural, I got to learn from NCST. And the one thing that really stuck with me was the middle neighborhoods hypothesis. When NCST visited Birmingham, we went around the city, went to Ensley, went to all the old steel mills, explored the city. And Chris Garland came, Jordan Backstrom came, even Christopher Tyson, president, came and kicked off our event. Chris Hoff, thank you for sharing data. I really appreciate that. And from learning from y'all, I got into this topic of the middle neighborhoods hypothesis, which is I can't tackle every year's property in Birmingham. There's 96,000 properties in total. 56,000 are residential. There are thousands and thousands of heirs property in Birmingham, 4,096 to be exact. Neighborhood Housing Services Birmingham, Legal Services Alabama, Clear Landing, even if we had full funding, we would not be able to take on 4,096 properties. It's just too much. Working with one family can take a year to 5 years. I mean, we're talking a remarkable amount of work. And so when I heard about the middle neighborhood hypothesis, I got excited because it told me where I might want to direct my energy and my attention. Where can the intervention have the greatest impact to sustain that neighborhood? And so this is an argument of tipping. And I know that it's a complicated thing to define tipping. These are all 47 middle neighborhoods here. I chose to do 47. I expanded the city median income to be even larger so I could have some more variation in it. I wanted to be able to see that category that is the red tier tipping, and I wanted to see the stable $800,000 houses in the blue districts up on the mountain below Mountain Brook, because they gave context to the greens and the yellows here in the middle. The vulnerable, meaning they're on the edge of tipping neighborhoods, but they haven't tipped yet. A little investment could go a really long way there. And then those who are becoming more and more vulnerable. I liked this approach because it gave me a way of thinking through and strategizing where do I put my effort on the ground? Which churches would be the top priorities for me to do outreach efforts at? Where should all of our printed booklets and resources go in terms of educating people on the ground? And so when you break it up across these same 4 tiers, stable heirs property is pretty close to clear title, but it is a little bit lower. Tipping, we see the same thing, but more remarkably lower. I mean, we're talking like $34,000 average for a clear title property. What I found really interesting is 2 things from this graph. First, that the land values are relatively consistent across the city, even if you're in a nicer developed part of edge of Mountain Brook, your land value is still relatively consistent across the neighborhoods to, say, Ensley. But second, the one that I find very interesting, and this is only through the middle neighborhoods hypothesis that I would have been able to even look at this, is that notice in tier 2 vulnerable, the green dots that I've been talking about, heirs property is actually valued more than clear title. That's because I have theories, I've looked into this, but they're being maintained, the family held on, and oftentimes they have beautiful corner lots. They've been multi-generational housing, meaning multiple branches of the family all live in these larger houses, and they've sustained relative to the other houses near them. And so in playing with this map, Heirs property are the size of the dots here. Again, I don't do dot maps anymore, so please forgive me. The neighborhoods are indicated as all the ones in color are middle neighborhoods. I think it is best to direct our attention to the orange and the green, the tier 2 and tier 3. This is actually almost identical to what the middle high neighborhoods hypothesis would argue for. I just expanded it to have the blue and the red there, so I had more variation. And so what I think urban and nonprofits can do that many social scholars have not been able to do for the last 50 years, you can ask new questions. And one of those new questions for me is the contagion effect. How much does an heirs property bring down the value of parcels surrounding it? And so this is just median value based on census tract averages. But based on that, what I find is that heirs property brings down your property value by the square foot. So if you are surrounded by one property, you anticipate it coming down pretty heavily. If you have two, it exacerbates further and further. In the two big neighborhoods where I've been focusing much of the research over the last few months, living next door to an heirs property on average brings down your property $18,000. And there is a woman up in Norwood that Evan Holloway and Chris and I and everyone got to go visit, and she is surrounded by 4 of them. Abandoned, vacant properties, and her property value has crashed because everybody else left. It's not their fault they left. They didn't have a clear title. It's just what happened. But the woman who held on in the middle has lost essentially all of her wealth because of this scenario. And really, it's a development issue at its core. I'd be remiss not to bring up the fact that I'm in Birmingham, Alabama, and race is a very big deal here. Birmingham is 2/3 Black and 1/4 white. Heirs property doubles in formerly red line neighborhoods. Going back to the 1937 Hulk boundaries, we see these problems exacerbate in areas that didn't ever receive the investment since then. Many of them were legal deserts then, and many remain legal deserts today. There's no one on the ground doing death and dirt. Yes, there might be trusted Black lawyers on the ground, but they might be doing things like personal injury law or something like that. We don't see too many young people or lawyers at all wanting to take on cases like this. One, because they're not sexy, they don't bring in a lot of money. And two, they oftentimes take a lot of effort for relatively low income. And so while I'm playing with this middle neighborhoods hypothesis, which I'm a very big fan of, if you can't tell by now, I wanted to really look at that tipping point there in the middle and see who fell right in the middle of these quadrants of clouded title density, but then along the y-axis here, put the age of homeowners over 65, so a percent, which means that I would actually suggest working in neighborhoods that have a rapid aging or retiree population that does not have clear title and already has a lot of heirs property. 10 wills in Wyland and Inglenook could go very, very far, and a will is much easier than clearing a title. If we only have so much resources, so much time, so much energy, where do we put it? And this gave me, the middle neighborhoods hypothesis gave us our project on the ground, a strategy for actually taking on a 4,096 household problem. We also have to stop the bleeding. So we need wills. Even if you don't have heirs property now, it doesn't mean that you won't be heirs property a few years from now. So wills on wheels, wherever we need to be, whatever church we need to be in on Saturdays or Sundays, going there and being very strategic about where we put our time and how we present our material. And so I'm not going to go too crazy deep into everything in our report for Neighborhood Housing Services Birmingham, but based on these tiers from the middle neighborhoods hypothesis, developing different outreach strategies based on what the neighborhood looks like. The tier 1 is stable. They really don't need much just to promote wills, but we shouldn't be spending our whole budget in an area that's already relatively affluent. Conversely, tier 4 that is severely distressed and struggling, you might clear a title, but it's not going to bring people back. It's that tier 2 and tier 3 in developing outreach strategies that effectively meet them. Now, I've playing with some graphs here because again, I'm a data geek at heart. If you put the median value over here of total appraisal value, logarithmic on the right side, you can see the patterns of all the neighborhoods, and the middle neighborhoods actually hold pretty consistently. But up here at the top, these are the areas that are very well off, the blues well off. But as you get further down, the wealth and value of a property starts to flatten out until eventually the value of most of the properties in those neighborhoods is below 10 grand. We want to see more of this and promote it going that way. We want to support the people who are able to hold on. We want to keep the families in their homes, but we also want to keep their value. We do not want to see it flatten out like we're starting to see in some of these down here. And so the thing I'm bad at, even though I work in an ag econ department, is translating what I'm proposing into actual output. This is based on clear landing numbers. This is a very specific nonprofit, specific to where we are. But clearing title or getting the wealth that is trapped under a clouded title freed up and what that could do over a 5-year recoverable tax base impact is these impact reports. My colleague at Jacksonville List, Christopher Smith, he's like, man, you got to learn the language of the financiers. They want to hear ROI ratios. And this is my best attempt at it based on the data we have. But in many of these neighborhoods, you can see a 13 plus multiply return. Like we can see these huge bumps. Yeah, clearing title might cost $1 million in certain areas, but the recoverable tax base of what could be done, assuming that the family moves back in. And so when I look at different policies that I've seen across the country, Detroit has one of the best ones, Make It Home, where if you promise to stay in the house and you're tax delinquent and you're a known heir, they use tax delinquency, clear the title in your name. And Michigan State did a study not too long ago. I think it was something like 87% was still there 5 years later. There are new creative ideas that you can do in cities that wouldn't work at a statewide or county level. I'm really excited at what these new ideas that Urban is bringing into the Heirs property space. That said, I do need to learn the finance side of this better so we can articulate it better to policymakers. Mayor Randall Woodfin wants to go all in on Heirs property, but it wasn't until we started turning him over actual data like this that we started to see him nod along and say, okay, well, let's start to think about effective outreach. And so with that, I've covered a lot. I don't want to do death by PowerPoint as academics often do, but I do want to invite you on this call to look at things like the two big networks as I currently know them. I know NeighborWorks has its own network and NCST has their network, but one is the Sarah 49, a project my colleagues and I started through the USDA. It is a national project where academics like myself can now claim our time working on heirs property as a part of our job because of this project. Nonprofits can join. You don't have to be affiliated with the university, but it's a structure and we have monthly calls for all 4 of these groups. And you get to hear what the new cutting edge research is or what new outreach program is being put on in Virginia next month or the new policies sweeping southern cities in the last 10 years. It's a community and I invite you all to join it because really it is part applied scholarship, but also more of an informal movement of people trying to actually do good through research. And then lastly, I have to shout out my favorite org, Heirs HPPN. If you haven't heard of them yet, look them up, hppn.info. It is the Heirs Property Practitioner Network. It is a network of over 300 lawyers all across the country doing heirs property law on the ground. They have made such a remarkable and incredible impact in the 2 years that they've existed, and they're rapidly growing. If you feel like, oh, we want to get into heirs property work, but it feels like I'm taking on too much, chances are there's people on the ground in the nonprofit world already working on it in some capacity where you are. If there aren't, check with the lawyers because the lawyers are kind of our beacon signal here. They have managed to do things in a remarkable, they've done things to scale that I could not have imagined 2 years ago. And then lastly, if you need any of our materials that we've created, everything's available to the public. For the Alabama Heirs Property Alliance, we have a podcast even. It's a resource guide, ways to talk to families, things to prepare when hurricane season's coming, what to do if you can't get in touch with a cousin, technical assistance support. we're happy to share any and all of our materials as you all start to grow into this space. But with that, thank you.
Still muted there. Ryan, Dr. Thompson, that was fantastic. Thank you. Covered so much material and really, really an excellent presentation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm just now, the second I stopped sharing, suddenly all of the questions popped up.
Yeah, there are a couple of these. So we'll start. Let's start with the Q&A, and then we'll get to some of the chat questions as well. So I think I'll kick us off, Chris, and then we can kind of handle what's in chat. So we got a question here. It says, sorry, I know this is specific, but any recommendations for finding readily available tax assessment information? It says here, Regrid does not have reliable info for Virginia, probably a VA problem. You want to answer?
There are some states that are just nightmares in my experience. The Dakotas have a non-disclosure law, like you can't get anything in some states, so it is a challenge. But oftentimes, and this is just off the cuff where I am, you can go in and just type in GIS and your county name, and oftentimes they'll have a portal just so you can check on taxes, square foot of acreage. A lot of cities are moving towards this direction so they can document, essentially make the data publicly available. That's what Citizens Access Portal was for us. I don't know what part of Virginia necessarily, but I do know that some of the bigger cities, I think Richmond's online now, as well as Greater Fairfax area. But you can just go and click on parcels, but it's not like an export everything. Getting a full downloadable Excel file like that is pretty rare. But if you oftentimes go to your tax assessor or probate court, they can work with you. I mean, our assessor was so kind, he even gave us a list of all the vacant or all the abandoned land bank properties that he's like, those are probably going to be next. So meeting people on the ground and building up. But if you type in GIS and your county name, you should find it.
Okay, great. Well, hopefully for Emily, that answers your question. If there's any follow-up, just let us know in the Q&A or chat.
Great.
Next,
And there's
go
also a
ahead,
couple
Chris.
questions here from Faith Triggs. I'll start with probably the easier of the two, although certainly could take some time to unpack. Faith was asking if you could repeat the number of heirs properties. I don't know if you mentioned it in the state of Alabama, but specifically in your research, that total count in Birmingham based on that assessment from last year.
Oh, the statewide report?
It does sound as if maybe you mentioned both a state count and then also from your own research there in Alabama. Was that 4,096 in?
Yeah, that's for Birmingham. And we actually we like to come in a little conservative. There are a few that are always on the fence, but we don't want to overestimate. We don't want to be the one who cried wolf. But let me pull up my file real fast. I have it here in one of the tables, and I'll report Alabama back in 1 second. So I have all of my state totals available. I can drop it in the chat if that helps people.
That would be great. Thank you.
And I only did the southern states thus far. I haven't tried to tackle. I have maps of California, but it's so big that San Bernardino is like its own state. So for Alabama, I was able to find 42,000 properties with a sum acreage just under 500,000 acres, so just under 500,000 acres, and the market value was 2.9 billion.
Thank you so much for adding that to the chat. That same individual, Faith Triggs, was asking how far back this data goes. Is this all the way back to the 1900s?
It is, what a great question, because that's like a data geek thing that I first asked too. If you go back in the record, it turns out that a lot of the local probate clerks and judges and everybody in their data system put 1/1/1930, because that's the day that many agree that like we transitioned to a new structure. But 1/1/1930 is also a code word in some areas for we don't know when the deed transacted. We have no clue. So they put it in as kind of a placeholder. But in theory, if your name's on the property, I mean, some of the properties I'm working on were bought in 1860, 1890. It doesn't say that in my data portal. It just is blank, but we went and pulled the deed and were able to find that. So it is a current snapshot. If you're looking through somewhere like CoreLogic or Regrid or Black Knight or what's the other one? Lightbox, those are the big ones right now. I find that the further you go back, the data quality starts to dip more and more. They just didn't digitize things in the 80s or 90s.
Thanks for that. It's really helpful.
All right. I think there are a couple more quick questions here for you, Ryan. So part of this question is, will you provide information for the monthly group calls for each? Not sure what they're referencing there.
This might have been for
Oh,
HPPN.
for the calls for SRDC or the Sarah 49.
Yeah.
Would it be possible when we send out the recording to send it in that email? The how to get on the lists to join
Oh,
the group.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. We can add that
Oh,
to
perfect.
the information we archive.
I
So
should have had that available.
yeah, so what we'll do, and we put it in the chat, we do archive the recording and the present, your presentation, Dr. Thompson. So all of that typically is up within 24 hours, and you'll see the recordings first and then the presentations at the bottom of that website, our website. So we can add anything you'd like there. Another question came in, is the neighborhood services of Birmingham study available? Would love to model and use the same attributes for our heirs property program. I believe that is.
Yes, it is. I mean, we've officially finalized. I don't think it's gone to print yet. Let me. Hopefully, we can maybe send it out with the next one.
Yeah, let's keep a note on
Sorry
that.
that it's not publicly facing yet. We're trying to make it pretty like Pew and Detroit did. I got to make all the formatting and aesthetics right.
Absolutely,
Us
absolutely.
academics normally just make a white paper and drop maps in, but urban and nonprofits, you all stuff make it pretty.
Great. Thank you for that. Very quickly, too, a question here from Tim Burgess, Michigan Land Banks. Another resource, as is the case in Detroit, would be to research if your state has land banks. This might have been helping to answer a question that Emily had. In Michigan, we bundle batches of quiet title actions. Michigan law also expedites the timing of land bank quiet title actions. So more of a comment here. And certainly, Tim, we thank you for that additional information.
The Birmingham
Uh,
Land Bank is very active down here.
mhm, mhm. Let's see, I missed this. Are these graphs in a public report from Stephen Kappen? Are your graphs in a public report?
No, everything is either from a publication, well, the publication stuff before Birmingham, and then everything else is in the uh, Birmingham study.
Okay,
So those are all coming out in that one report.
okay. And then just a last question here in the Q&A. What are a few things that property owners can do so as to not have their land stolen in light of the rise in deed theft?
There are things that are happening now that I would have never dreamt of, where just a few blocks away, someone had a piece of land surveyed and then used it to try and file a quitclaim. I mean, people are doing all sorts of creative things now to try and steal property. One is if you're not at the property, visit it regularly. The UPHPA says you have to have a sign up if there's any of those changes going on, if you're tax delinquent, any of those things. The big one though that I'm finding is tax delinquency is a big one that now that most tax sales are going online, people are buying them from all over the country as an investment strategy. So what some women here in Birmingham have been doing is just going around and paying taxes of their neighbors who are delinquent to make sure that they don't get pushed out. Then the neighborhood gets rezoned. But one, pay your taxes, visit the property, maintain it. Some cities are now even claiming properties because the grass got too tall. St. Pete, Florida was the first to do that, and they took several dozen properties because it was not being maintained to HOA standards. Like being aware of some of these things. Big one though, taxes, keep grass cut, visit the property.
Great recommendations. I know we're a little bit out of time to allow for our policy update. Dr. Ryan Thompson, thank you so much for an incredible presentation. If anyone has any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to NCST and we'll get you some answers if we haven't answered it here today. And also, Dr. Ryan Thompson has included his email address here in the chat, our WT0012@auburn.edu. All right, next up, Jenny will give you a minute and a half, maybe.
That's,
Sorry about that, to
that's all
provide us
right.
with some updates. Thank you so much.
That's all right. We'll kind of do a lightning kind of round here on the federal policy updates. So right now, Washington's moving at a remarkable pace when it comes to housing and home ownership and all the legislative movement happening. So we're seeing a historic bipartisan breakthroughs alongside of some tough budget negotiations. First, the biggest news that you've probably already been hearing about is the 21st Century Road to Housing Act. So last week, the House passed an amended version with an overwhelming bipartisan vote. And so since the Senate passed its version in March, this package is now again with the Senate, who will vote on the House passed version of the bill, although we're not certain yet and totally clear when that is or if that'll happen, given just the regular shifting dynamics that we're seeing. We're also looking at the fiscal year 27 HUD spending bill. And with that, the House Appropriations Subcommittee advanced that bill, proposing a 71.4 billion budget for the agency. So that is, just for context, an 8% reduction from fiscal year 2026. And while we give pause on the funding cut, the bill does successfully avoid some of the deeper cuts that we anticipated with the proposed initial budget from the president. So both of those things are on our radar, are definitely the biggest takeaways just here in Washington, D.C. But we do see that housing is definitely still top priority here. And with that, thank you all.
Thanks, Jenny. Great updates there as well. Thank you all for staying a little longer with us today. We've enjoyed the conversation. Stay tuned for our June 17th Community Impact Briefing. We'll be sending out more information on that later on. Dr. Ryan Thompson, thank you again, and everybody have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye-bye.